another color to describe it. And I think a lot of times in music it's hard to describe how to create emotions without, using specific terms. So I think when I use the word color to describe how I want to play, it's an all-encompassing term. So like when I play music with color, I play bright sounds, dark sounds, warm, cold, loud, soft, all words that you would use when you're describing shades of blue or shades of any other color. And so more dynamics, more range, and you're just gonna guess and hope that's what the conductor's talking about. So for an example, thought I would play the second movement of Mozart's Clarinet Concerto, very beautiful piece. I would play it without color and then with color. Hopefully you'll be able to tell which one has color. Kind of all these things as musicians we have at our disposal to make music interesting, and same words you would use to, make colors interesting. So that's color to me.
Color is kind of an elusive description of music, but it's a great description of music because it kind of gives us a visual representation of what to aim for. So we use, unless you have synesthesia where you can see colors, you don't necessarily use can you make that more green? But like Jack was saying, it's more like, can you make that brighter? Can you make that darker? Can you make that warmer? So that's what we aim for when we're playing, especially with the orchestra, when we're trying to blend with other sections. The unique thing about percussion is that we can also use strokes. We can change our instruments to achieve that kind of color change. So you'll also hear a lot of comparisons with music to painting styles. So Hanna played a piece from the Impressionistic period of music, and there's also an Impressionistic painting period. So you have romantic music, romantic paintings they use, but also kind of the stroke that they use. That's what kind of makes Van Gogh, Van Gogh and Monet. So I just want to I'll give you an example. Let's say I have a 1/4 note. Okay, I can either play it like this, you know, with a mallet. Okay, I could play it very short like this. I could use another stick, like a drumstick. And just listen to the difference between sound. And maybe you're trying to blend with the flute, you know, where it's in the upper register of the orchestra, you want that higher pitch. Now, if you're playing with the full orchestra, maybe you want a fuller sound, you know, something that kind of cuts through the whole orchestra. So listen to the difference between that and this one. Very slow stroke, and you'll kind of see. Things are vibrating there with probably a bunch of mallets laid out for different moments. So maybe we want, like I was saying with that instrument, maybe a stroke that like is very thick, or maybe we want like a pointillistic stroke, or it kind of, you know, it kind of just pointy, but it doesn't blend as much. So the mallets kind of achieve that. It's a very subtle difference, but it does kind of affect the overall sound. So I'm going to play you guys a piece. It's actually for lute, which is like a guitar, basically. So this is obviously not a lute, but you know, a lot of times we'll play pieces that are not necessarily for our instruments. But I'm going to try to achieve the sound of a lute. So. I'm going to be changing mallets halfway through, so just try to see the difference of, you know, how those mallets affect each portion of the piece. Yeah. you can kind of lay into it a lot easier, whereas this one, it starts to get very harsh in the low end when you start playing loud. So you have to take that into consideration. The other thing, I don't know if you noticed, but sometimes we'll change the beating spot of the mallet. So when I was playing with these, if you angle the stick, it's a lot softer. So if you're trying to have that more warm tone but not change mallets, you kind of change the direction of where you hit it. So lots of tricks we got. But just a brief introduction to what we're thinking about, whether we're playing solo or in the orchestra. So yeah, hope you enjoy.
Seem to relate specifically to their instruments. For instance, Hanna used the word hollow, and that's not something that I typically think of with the cello, but when you're blowing into something, or blowing over an instrument, it makes sense to use that word. Or Andres mentioned the word soft, and then I was expecting something about taste from Jack with his reed, but didn't get that. That's okay. I wanted to talk about color as a composer, someone who writes music, because I think it sheds a little bit of a different light than it does when we perform music. With performing, color is typically evocative of emotion, and I think as a composer, it can work in the opposite direction. And so first I'll talk a little bit about my fellow Sagittarius Taylor Swift, who before she was a tortured poet, had an album called Red. Anybody know that album? So there's of course a track. Good, at least one person is old enough to know that album. There were a lot of songs that were dedicated to different colors or inspired by colors, and the main track on that album, Red, she's talking about loving him was red. I don't know if that's the same color for Travis Kelce or not. For me, when I painted my office a couple weeks ago, I picked a very dark teal blue, because to me that's something I find to be relaxing and inspiring as a composer. I also turn to visual art as a composer to find influence. So one piece that I wrote for orchestra is called Gathering Sunset, and it was based on a painting by a Michigan Impressionist artist, which had a beautiful orange, bright sunset in the background. A person was actually gathering pumpkins, but I was more attracted to the idea of sunset and how it can provide, well, if you think about the sunsets you've seen over the last couple weeks in Michigan and how beautiful they are, it provides this sense of being at home or at peace or coming back to your house after an adventure or a long day at work and feeling this sense of calm and being at peace. So that's one example of how I've used color as a composer. Another piece, I'm often drawn to bright colors, and so the piece that Detroit Symphony played that I wrote back in March was called Solo, and that had this beautiful picturesque blue sky in the background and these pastel desert colors. And so I think for me as a composer, I'm always thinking specifically about different colors and how I can turn them into the colors that we talk about as musicians. And so maybe that's where the term chromesthesia comes, and turning sound into color or color into sound. I want to play a piece for you by Bach that most of you will recognize. And the reason I picked this piece is the G major suite, number 1 for unaccompanied cello. I'll play the prelude. For me, there's this sort of paradox of Baroque music where the idea behind Baroque music is that each movement should have its own affect or maybe a single color palette. But then within that movement, there are so many different twists and turns that you end up getting almost the whole rainbow. And so this first movement of the suite, the prelude, it does have one uniform color throughout, which is that it's a Baroque piece for solo cello. But then within that, you can see it go in into the dark depths of the underworld when I play on the low register. And then you'll see these huge arcs, these waves that rise up and create a colorful rainbow, especially near the end of the piece. And so I would like you to think about, as I play this, what is the palette that I'm using when I play? And then what are the different colors that transition throughout that palette? With all four of us that shows off all of the different colors that you just heard in collaboration. So one of the prompts that I'd like to ask you, any of you can choose to answer if you want, is perhaps we can relate our discussion of color to the recording that Detroit Symphony did of the Blues Symphony. So all four of us, I believe, were on this recording. Is that correct? And I know that later on in the time that you're here, you're going to be working specifically with this fifth movement of the Blues Symphony, which was called Big City Break. The word blues is immediately evocative of a color, and so if any of you want to talk about maybe what the word blue means to you in the sense of music, or playing blues music versus playing classical music, how that's different. Does anybody have any specific? Yeah.
I just remember one of the movements, there was, I'm trying to think, there were maybe like 6 or 7 movements. There was several movements and each one had a very different character. And I just remember one of my favorite movements was a gospel movement, and it was, I remember the brass were like doing these almost screams, like a hallelujah scream in church. It was like, I'm not gonna try to do it, but it was awesome. It was really, really cool. They were all doing it, in different times as if it was different people. And there was a tambourine part that was like, it was like it's supposed to be like a gospel tambourine, which is played very differently than how we would do it in the orchestra. We for this recording we used a full hand and just slapped the hell out of it, and it was awesome. And anyway, it was just a moment where you kind of took away all the I guess the restrictions of playing in the orchestra and how you should play your instrument. And it was just kind of like a letting loose scene. I mean, I guess it's not necessarily a color thing, but it was definitely a character that we were trying to convey. And it was really a memorable moment. So yeah, I hope you guys hear that one.
Yeah, as we're talking about this today, I'm realizing more and more with certainty that color and character are really intertwined for us as musicians, and that's why we try to play with different colors, is to have different characters. And each movement on this recording is a really different character and requires us as musicians to change tone color on our instrument to bring that out. Another movement that was really fun for me is, I think it's the 6th movement, which is like a samba style, which is one that we get to play every once in a while. We get to play in that sort of style, and it's so different from Mozart, where I picture the paintings of like the still portraits of these people very proper in their proper attire and their wigs and very buttoned up, and that's kind of how I try to play Mozart. It's really refined, it's very proper, everything's like in its place. And then something with the more Latin style, like that samba, is a totally like freer, more fun, earthy, and the conductor kept asking me as a classical flutist to play dirtier, like a dirtier sound, like crack, just go for it. And that's not really, I'm not as comfortable in that style because I've played more classical music, but so you can listen for that in the 6th movement. There's a flute solo that I have to play, and they wanted it really dirty and cracky, and that was really fun for me to try to do.
Yeah, hello. I grew up playing a lot of jazz and a lot of blues music, and I really, really love that style of music. And I think inherently, as classical musicians, when we're playing the blues, I think something switches in our brains where we get to be more creative and more free. And I think naming this whole symphony, the blues symphony, just, at least for me, it totally frees it up the whole time. I think, like for another example, when we play Rhapsody in blue, like something in our brain switches where it's suddenly more free and more colorful and more fun, I think. And I think it'd be really interesting if we played Mozart in yellow. And I think that would totally change how people play. And it's just really interesting how little things like that, just giving us one color to go off of, totally changes how we view things. So I love it, personally.
It's interesting too, in this movement number 5, the big city breaks. It is this big city landscape at first, and you hear the whole orchestra playing and these big shots of maybe the whole scene of the city. And then there are moments when you dive down into the city and you're going to specific streets and you'll hear just the strings playing. And it's like if you've ever heard a parade and it's like 3 blocks away, and then you walk around the corner and suddenly the sound just comes alive. That's the sort of feeling that this movement evokes, even if it's almost exactly the same music being played by different instruments in the orchestra and kind of bouncing around the orchestra. So that's one thing that I really like about this movement that I'm sure you'll latch on to when you start painting later. So, I said I would open it up to questions. If anyone has a question, maybe you can just raise your hand and then speak loudly. I don't know if we have, we do have a mic. Great, thank you, Joe. So just raise your hand and Joe will walk over to you.
My question is with regard to the emotional kind of color that you are trying to evoke in a piece, how is it the composition? Is it the conductor? Is it your individual style or reflection that kind of determines what emotional kind of connection you have to a piece? And then how do you kind of negotiate that with the rest of the musicians in a group?
Thank you. That's a very thoughtful question. Anybody want to take it on?
That's a really, really good question, and all the questions you just asked are questions I ask myself all the time. So when we prepare for a week in orchestra, I think what I'm thinking about is I'm learning the building blocks of that piece, just the notes, rhythms, all the basic things. But then, I also, especially in the solos, as a principal flute, I do play a lot of solos, so I play a lot by myself, and that is the opportunity to kind of dive into these questions more. And they're often informed by historical context, like what's appropriate, and then within that range of what's appropriate, it's like what feels personal to me. And I come into rehearsal with what I've practiced, and then if the conductor says you're playing that really cheery, I hear it so much as cheery, can you try it again, sadder, whatever, then my job is to say absolutely, and then do my best to do that and to and to make that emotion come across. So I feel like it is a little bit of a negotiation like you're talking about. So that's for my solos especially.
Yeah, I think it's what makes classical music so great and different from AI is that all of us have our different opinions and we bring them all to the stage and have to figure out how to turn that into one overall product. So great question. I saw another one over there. I don't know where Joe, yeah. Thank you.
As the mic gets passed, I just wanted to add, in a big orchestra, there has to be a bit of a hierarchy too. Like, we can't all just come in with all of our emotions, because that would just be too much, I think, for everyone. But I think we come in, like Hanna said, with what we prepared, and then the conductor does kind of fine tune, like an equalizer, like hey, maybe more this emotion, maybe more that emotion. In today, in this setting where it's just us, or when Hanna has a solo, we have more control of that individual emotion. So I think as the group gets bigger, we have to kind of be more conscious about the greater group,
I mean, I just think about how jazz musicians kind of play off of each other, and that's kind of my reference point for how you would do something similar in classical.
Yeah, it's definitely keeping your ear open like that too. I mean, you're a better musician when you got your ear open, like that.
There is imitation like that in classical music too. We're just not coming up with the music like you might in jazz, but if our page is kind of like Andres was saying, if it's just quarter notes, we have to decide how to interpret those quarter notes. And so if I play 2 measures of quarter notes and then the clarinet, plays them, we will play off each other. In rehearsals, it's really fun to get to explore that. So maybe someone will play it with one emotion, one character, one color, and then we try to imitate that. And then we do it again in rehearsal, and if I hear my colleagues trying a different character or color, then I will also do that different character or color and imitation, and that's kind of maybe how we do that in classical music.
Thank you for allowing me to ask this question. I'm a retired art teacher, and I always played music throughout all of my classes at the high school and elementary or college, wherever I taught. And I always associated my own artwork and my paintings with sound, but I also noticed that I started describing things in terms of location. And I was wondering if you did that. For instance, when I was listening to you and I was really zoning in on the piece on the screen up there, I was thinking of a deep ocean, and I used to talk to my students about that sometimes to break through any blocks that they had and trying to figure out where they wanted to head next on a painting, for instance, I would say, where do you close your eyes and where are you? Are you in an ocean? Are you flying? Where are you? Are you on top of a mountain looking down? If you are, okay, they give me a location, and then I say, okay, what colors do you see? And then the next thing and the music in the background always influenced that. So I was wondering, sometimes I would do that for classroom management. If they were getting rowdy, I would put on violin, and when they were really falling asleep because it was early, I'd put on jazz especially, or occasionally rap, but not very often, because then they kind of went wild, and because they were really moving. And so I was wondering, do you do location with your thoughts also?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the more or the thicker your thesaurus is as a teacher, when you're trying to describe how to play something, the better. Oftentimes, like, things will be described as sunrises and sunsets and flying or running, or, you know, any verb, pick your verb, or, you know, on top of a mountain. Like, I guess specifically, there's a piece by Strauss called Alpine Symphony, and so it's there in the title, so you have to put yourself in the Alps. So yes, I think there is no limit to how esoteric musicians can be when describing how to play things. And I think, yeah, locations, verbs, nouns, everything is up for grabs. Sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it's not, but we try and use it all, for sure.
So we're running short on time, and we have to let you get to your next thing. I wanted to thank all of my colleagues and friends here for being on stage and joining me for this panel. Can you give them a shout out?